Joining me now, John Bolton served as the 25th United States ambassador to the UN from 2005 to 2006. He was the 26th United States National Security Advisor. Here to talk about several things. Ambassador, welcome back. How are you doing?
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. So the paperback version of your book, The Room Where It Happened, is out with a very spicy new foreword.
Well, it is intended to take a look at what happened in Trump's first term, which I describe in the book, and try and imagine what a second Trump term would be like. And my conclusion is that a second term would be a lot like a first, except worse in many different respects. That's really what the foreword tries to explain.
Now, one of the things, and we've talked about this before, is Trump's curiosity for pulling the U.S. out of NATO. There was recently some legislation in Congress that would prevent a president from pulling the U.S. out of NATO. I wonder if that would be an actual deterrent.
Not for Trump. And I have to say, as somebody who spent a fair amount of time getting out of treaties that were disadvantageous to the United States, like the anti-ballistic missile treaty that of 1972 we got out of in the Bush administration, the intermediate range nuclear forces treaty we got out in the Trump administration, others. So I've been through this process of withdrawing from treaties, and I believe it's exclusively a presidential decision. So legislation that purports to limit the president's ability to withdraw from a treaty, I think, would be unconstitutional. Now, people, if Trump announced he were withdrawing from NATO, people could try and go to court with that statute in mind. But even if it took 2 or 3 years of litigation, which would be possible, nonetheless, the lack of faith in NATO that Trump's announcement of withdrawing would show could still permanently cripple the institution. I think it would be a grave mistake for the United States, but I do think Trump will do it.
Yeah, it seems like. Also, he has said that he would be able to resolve this conflict, this war in Ukraine, in a day or so. What would that look like by your estimation?
Well, I think that's silly, and I think it shows that how little Trump really understands what's at stake in this unprovoked aggression by Russia against NATO, against Ukraine. But I think what would happen, and I would be very worried about this too, is Trump may try to bring a meeting together between Putin and Zelensky, and it would fail because these are complicated, contentious issues. And if it did, Trump would be looking around for who to blame, because obviously it wouldn't be his fault that it failed. And given his affinity for Putin, I'm very worried he would turn and blame it on Zelensky, which would obviously have significant negative consequences for Ukraine. This is an example of how little Trump really understands what's at stake in national security. He has long felt that relations between governments depend on the personal relationships between the heads of state. So if he has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin, in Trump's mind, he thinks we have a good relationship with Russia. That is simply not true, but that's what Trump thinks.
Well, and I mean, look, successive U.S. presidents have struggled with Netanyahu, but you couldn't say that the country doesn't have a good relationship with Israel.
Well, exactly. And frankly, for those who think that whatever else Trump might do, he would be a staunch supporter of Israel, especially in present circumstances, I wouldn't count on that. Trump doesn't like Netanyahu personally. And remember, one of the constraints that Trump will be free of in a second term is he will never face the voters again, because the Constitution permits only 2 terms. So the worry about what political consequences there may be for taking a position contrary to what Israel would like the United States to advocate, for Trump would look a lot lower than for any other president.
What about China? What would he do there, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of rumor out there about what a tough line he would take on China economically, imposing more tariffs and so on. I do think he blames China, among others, for his loss in 2020 because of COVID. And Trump's instinct to use tariffs against almost anybody is pretty intense. But frankly, I think what he wants more than anything else is to make a big deal with his good buddy Xi Jinping. He used to talk about the biggest trade deal in history. And I think if Trump wins, if Xi Jinping calls him the day after the election and says, "Congratulations, I can't wait to get together," they'll fall back in love, and the tariff thing will be a memory very shortly.
Similarly with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he can't wait to have his first get together with Kim and see what he can give away on the Korean nuclear front, which is even more dangerous today than when he was president. And this tendency to get along with authoritarian leaders, I don't think any of us understand why, except maybe it's a form of envy on Trump's part that he wishes he could get away with what they get away with. And I think that's going to be one of the domestic problems in his administration, is that's exactly the way he'll try and act.
Nikki Haley and some others are making a lot of Trump being unhinged and Trump, maybe losing a step. As you watch the former president campaign to be president again, what are your thoughts, having worked so closely with him?
Well, I don't see deterioration. I mean, I wasn't impressed with Trump's capacity when he was president. I don't see a decline. What I do see is much more of an emphasis on retribution. He talks about it. It's clearly something he would like to engage in against his political enemies, and of which he's got a long list. And I think it's one of the ways in which there'd be enormous pressure placed on the Constitution, and why 4 years of a second Trump term would be just contentious beyond belief. I mean, what kinds of lawyers would he put into the Justice Department to try and get them to carry out his orders? He used to say he wanted John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, prosecuted for violating the Logan Act and the first term, and people just basically ignored it. It never happened, obviously. But in a second term, he will want yes men and women at the Department of Justice who will follow out these kinds of orders. I think that's just one example of the kind of trouble he can cause in pursuing this retribution presidency.
On current events, Ambassador, I would love to get your perspective on this. The U.S., on that drone attack that happened in Jordan, they have identified the party responsible, and it is the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, described as an umbrella group of Iran-backed militias that include the militant group Kataib Hezbollah. And I wonder what you think about that and what the appropriate response might be.
Well, I think the appropriate response is attacking Iranian assets inside Iran. I think up until now, Iran has paid no pain for anything of what's going on in the Gulf. Not for Hamas's attack on Israel, not for the Houthi in Yemen trying to close the Red Sea to commercial traffic, not for Hezbollah in Lebanon rocketing northern Israel, and not for the Shia militia attacks on U.S. military and civilian personnel in Syria and Iraq. I think in many respects, Iran views their proxies, their terrorist surrogates, as expendable. And I think until Iran itself begins to bear the cost of their belligerence, their aggression in the region, they'll just keep pushing until they see where they finally meet resistance. They killed Americans. This was sadly entirely foreseeable. I think the administration should take action against targets inside Iran. I don't think the administration will do that. I think we'll know almost any time now what their response is going to look like.
Really, always great to get your perspective. Ambassador John Bolton, his book is called The Room Where It Happened. The new paperback edition is out now with an all-new foreword. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Talk soon.